Hello, everyone. So nice to have you here with us today. I'm Jo Evershed. I'm the CEO of Gorilla Experiment Builder, and I'm your host today. With me, I have Nick Hodges, who is our CTO and who has been building these new tools. So the first thing I want you to do is access the chat. It should be at the bottom of your menu. You should be able to see the chat. And in the chat, I want you to introduce yourselves. I want you to put in your name and what university or company you're from, just so that I have a sense of who is here today. I'm just trying to see how I access the chat. So that I can see where everyone's coming from. Here you go. I've got it open now. So yes, so probably the first thing you need to do is to change it from hosts and panelists to everyone. So go down to the chat and change it to everyone, and then you can say, okay, so just a quick sound check. Nick, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Nermeen, I think it might be your speakers or your audio that's not working. Do let us know if you continue to have problems. Okay, Katya's confirmed that she can hear fine as well. So what I'd like you to do is change the chat to everyone and say, introduce yourself. Who are you from? Where you're coming from? Hi, Simone. Hi, Brian from Swansea. Hi, Richard Allen from the University of Leeds. Hi, Tay from University of Saskatchewan. Hi, Tate from Swansea. Hi, Eliza from Zurich. So we've got people from the UK, from Canada, from Zurich, Switzerland, from Basel in Switzerland, I believe, Padova. Really lovely to meet you here today. Thank you for introducing yourselves. And then second thing, just to get us all in the mood, it also gives people a bit more time to arrive, is what I want you to type into chat. Are you most excited about? Are you team game builder or team multiplayer? I just want to know who I'm talking to today. Is this an audience who is passionately excited about gamifying their tasks, or are you and Olga is team both? I love it. Or are you super excited about running multiplayer experiments? Team game builder. Lots of people are excited about game builder, and game builder for Eva. Amazing. Both multiplayer. We've got some multiplayer people as well. Well, that's good to hear. Thank you so much. So today's webinar is all about the new tools that we've been developing for over a year now. And you can imagine quite a lot of work goes into these behind the scenes before we even start talking about them. And then over the last 3 months, we've been hinting and talking about them a little bit and testing them with some early users. Simone, I'm glad you spotted the gorilla. It's my little Where's Wally thing to see how attentive people are. But what was I saying? Yes, so we've been working on them and we've been testing them with people, and now we're ready to show them to a wider audience. And you are the very first people, other than the team and some very close confidence, to see these new tools in so much detail. Now, we know from listening to our users that participant motivation, attention, and engagement are very important for data quality. In fact, they're everything. We hate the idea of our participants being bored and not doing our task properly. And so for a long time, we've wanted to find ways to make your studies more fun and engaging. And in fact, this is where Nick and I started about 9 years ago now, I think, making games for researchers off the shelf, but it's slow work. And we've just spent all this time trying to create these games so that you can build them for yourself. Now, what I want you to do is, the other thing to learn is how to use the question and answer. So next to the chat that you're all now experts at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A panel as well. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel, and we have Claire, who's a member of our team, who will try and answer any questions that she knows the answers to as we go, and we can pick up any that we haven't in the Q&A session. So that's the place to register your questions. Now, over to Nick Hodges. He is the CTO of Gorilla. Nick is a seasoned game developer. Before founding Gorilla with me, he worked on large franchise titles like Call of Duty, Lara Croft, Resident Evil. If you've ever played Call of Duty, in the chat, can you say I play Call of Duty, or just Call of Duty, or CD, so that Nick knows that you've actually already played one of his games at some point in your life. But his real love is serious games that have a purpose beyond just enjoyment of the game. With research games, he's found that niche. And we've been building them together, as I said, for about 10 years now. I suspect it's always been a dream of his to build a game engine. And with Gorilla Game Builder, he's taken on the challenge of giving each of you the tools you need to become game developers too. Nick, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. What an amazing introduction. So yes, I'm going to talk about, as I said, game builder and multiplayer. I see we've already successfully divided our audience into two warring factions, but please, regardless of which one you're kind of more interested in, at the end, I'm going to talk about how we can use the two of them together. So stay tuned for that. To get us started, so, like I said, today we're presenting some of the new tools that are coming to Gorilla in 2022. Now, we're obviously going to be talking about how excited we are for them and how powerful they are, how much you can do with them. But it's important to say up front, I think you already know how to use these tools. If you've used Gorilla before, a lot of the same ideas have carried over, and so many of the concepts will be very familiar. If you haven't, we've been finding the new tools are a lot more intuitive and easier to learn than the current generation. So this is fundamentally an evolution, not a revolution. It's not a massive conceptual leap in how they work. It's not a whole new thing to learn. We obviously knew we couldn't just pull the rug out from under everybody and have them start again. So for all the new possibilities on offer, everything is based on familiar, tried and trusted fundamentals. So what is the Game Builder and how does it fit in? So the Game Builder is another tool like the Task Builder, but for building games. And it's focused on more game-like things rather than your traditional stimulus response reaction time tasks. Now, one of the sort of hardest things we found designing these tools was working out where the line between the Task Builder and the Game Builder was. Because on the one hand, we knew for Game Builder, we wanted sort of game tech. We wanted graphics and animations and particle effects to allow you to create richer, more playful experiences. But on the other hand, a lot of researchers are going to want to make either gamified versions of the existing tasks or very least stay quite closely coupled to existing paradigms. So we still need some research tech in there. We still need some semblance of a trial structure. We need stimuli and response times. And even though the participant experience might be quite different, we at the end of the day, we want the same kind of data in the end. We want trial results and accuracy and reaction times because we're going to analyze it in the way that we've been doing so far. Before we get into the details of it, what is the big motivation here? Why would you go for Task Builder? Why would you go for the Game Builder over the Task Builder? Now, ultimately, we think that the big prize here is better quality data overall. If your task is fun and engaging, your participants will be more focused on your task and pay more attention. We think you should get lower attrition because your participants don't get bored. And this is particularly key in longitudinal studies where clearly maintaining motivation over the course of the whole protocol is essential. And certainly in some of the projects that we've worked on, we found that motivation actually increased over time when it was fun to play. And finally, by rooting your task in some kind of world and some kind of fiction, you can also improve participant comprehension. It's easier to explain to people what to do. We already know that treasure is good and sharks are scary. And so you can use well-known tropes like that to kind of frame the action. And all of this together is going to help you get the best out of your participants.
Oh, Nick, can I just interrupt you there with a quick question?
Yeah.
And it's really a question for the audience. What does better quality data mean to you? What's the one thing that would improve the quality of your data? And what would that mean for your research? Can you put that in the chat just so that we get a sense of, is data quality something that you've struggled with, that you worry about, and how you think it could be resolved? They've all gone a bit quiet.
I'm reminiscing about Call of Duty. But well, put that in the chat because we'd like to come back to that one because I think there's some really interesting bits there. Now I'm going to show you some actual demos in a moment, but first I want to set the tools in context. How do you go about designing a game? Now, I'm sure some of you might be thinking, well, I mean, this sounds great, but this sounds really hard. I don't know where to start. I'm not a gamer. I don't spend hours on my PlayStation, whatever. But don't worry, these are, as you said, small, simple games for research purposes. they're not the next sort of big console game or Call of Duty or whatever. But what we're looking to do here is take a lot of the ideas from mainstream games and distill them down to something simple and accessible. Now, as Joe alluded to, I've worked in the games industry for years. I've made loads of games, and I'm going to show you all how to be game designers today. So the first step in all this is just to design your fiction. And fundamentally, this means you need to create a world that the player is in. You need to give the player some kind of agency within that world. And then finally, you need to align the mechanics of your game with the goals that you're setting. Now, this sounds quite lofty and high level, but you can boil this down into just 4 sentences. So just fill in the blanks. You are in space. You are an astronaut. You have to repair the space station. Watch out for asteroids. Good luck. So simple. That's all you need. The second step is to storyboard out your game. This basically means just draw it out on paper, PowerPoint, however you like to do it. And all you're doing here is sketching out what happens step by step, screen by screen. Now, when you came up with your fiction, you probably had some kind of ideas in your head as to what this might look like to the player. So start with those and sort of draw around them. And this design phase is super important. This is where you work out how the interaction is going to work. And this is where you get rid of 90% of the ideas that are really lovely, but just too hard or too fiddly to get them to work successfully. So once you've got your storyboards, you now need to source your art assets. Now, we're not going to go and try and create loads of artwork ourselves. We're going to find artwork that already exists and just use that. So the way to do that, go to your storyboards and make a list of all the individual items, all the individual props that you drew in all of your mockups, and go shopping for images of them. You might start at some of the big stock image sites like Shutterstock. There are similar royalty-free ones, which are really good. We've actually internally been doing really well with a site called Pixabay, which actually lets you specifically search for illustrations, which is really useful. And as I say, everything on there is royalty-free, and you don't need to worry about sort of image licensing and everything for that. If you have too many, then go back to your storyboards and simplify. And bear in mind, you can do an awful lot with just one image. You can make a forest with just one tree. So you can change the scale, you can flip it horizontally, make it lighter or darker. And suddenly, just with this one image, you can make what looks like quite a convincing forest. Transparent backgrounds are usually a must, because then you can layer things over each other very nicely. And then generally the only image manipulation, you should need to do is if you need to resize things or maybe cut bits out that you don't want. If you don't have access to image manipulation software on your computer, there's a free online resource there called Photopea, which is essentially a button by button clone of Photoshop that runs in the browser. So there we go. Now it's time to build your task. So as we say, I mean, I think this applies to everything. Stub out the big parts, come back and fill in the details later. And I think this is a particular thing with games, but obviously it's a more general piece of advice, is if something's not working or it's too hard to get it to look right, take a step back and see if there's an easier way. Go back to your storyboard if you need to change how a sequence works. Go back and look for a different piece of art if you can't quite get it to look right. This is often quite an organic process. And then finally, piloting. Now, the main things you'll want to ask yourself here that are specific to games are, first of all, do people understand what to do? What you need to put into your instructions and what's just obvious from the world around them? Is any of your art confusing or distracting? Are there some things that are ambiguous? Is there too much movement in the background that's confusing your participants? And finally, is it fun? Now, obviously, we're doing this for research, not just for sort of recreation, but you still want to ensure that that this is a fun and engaging to play and people are going to want to get to the end of your task. So I've got some example games to show you. The first two are works in progress from our staff who have been putting the game builder through its paces. So the first one is from Megan. Now, Megan's recently graduated with a BSc in psychology, and she joined us about 3 weeks ago. She's been using the game builder for about 4 days, and this is how far she's got in that time. So she is building a primacy and recency task. And in her task, the aliens have visited Earth, and they're trying to show you what they've collected from Earth. And you need to remember as many of them as you can. So the alien appears, the little tractor beam shows up what it is. You see the thing, and it scrolls off to the right, and the alien says what it is. Then the tractor beam goes again, and the next item appears and scrolls off. So these are all images that she's got from Pixabay. She hasn't had to draw anything. She's obviously stubbed these various bits out, and already this is more compelling than a simple memory game that you might build in the task builder. So that's how far she's got. An elephant, good choice. The next one is from Claudia. Now, Claudia's been with us a lot longer, but similar had the game builder for a similar amount of time. So she's doing an Iowa gambling task, but with pots of gold, and I think in her one, there's a variation where the leprechaun is happy if he manages to steal your gold and angry if he isn't. I think she wants to put smoke coming out of his ears as well. And if you get lucky, there's also an animation with the horseshoe that she's put together. That's where she's got to with this one. Now, the reason I'm showing it to you this way is in the game builder, you can actually preview it directly in the tools rather than having to go and do a completely separate preview. So you can try little bits out individually. Now, obviously, these are not finished, and obviously these are work in progress, but I'm showing you these because so you can see how they come together and imagine building them yourself. If I only ever show people the finished product, it's quite hard to imagine what that whole sort of process looks like. But this is after a matter of days and how far they've got in that. So with that said, let's move on to some more complete ones. So these are some older ones. These are actually 4 separate little games. This is a really simple one where you just have to pop as many balloons as possible, but it's showcasing all the particle effects you can put in there. This one, you have to remember the pattern of the bees, and if you're too slow, then they fly away. There we go. And this is actually a sort of memory task that we built a while back for a researcher who's researching motor neuron disease and that kind of thing. This is, you have to, again, it's another sequence one, and you're meant to have one finger over each of these spots and launch the fireworks in the right order. And again, you see the particles here, there's an animation moving down the fuse, and that's when they're ready to go off. And then finally, it's my favorite one, the train one. So this is a tracing task where you have to hold your finger over the train and have it follow the tracks. But if you move your finger too far away, the train's going to slow down and eventually stop. So you've got to keep your finger in the right place to make it continue along the tracks. So nearly there. Come on, train. So these are all built in these tools. Some of them needed a tiny bit of scripting to move things along, but the vast majority of stuff is all there for you. This is moving on. This is a sort of puzzle game for that we did for some of our some readers a while ago. Here you hear an audio prompt that tells you where to place the objects along the bottom. So in this case, the audio doesn't come through on Zoom, but it says the wheel is above the bat. So this is using drag and drop, which is something that I'm sure a lot of you are going to want to use to frame the action in your games. In this case, if you put it in the wrong place, it shakes and goes back, and then you put it in the right place, you get the effects. And here you collect jewels that then eventually will slide into your backpack. And in this particular task, the clues get more ambiguous, and it might be that you need to work out whether to put it above or below, because there might be 2 items you have to place and so on. Then more advanced again, this is rather than a single game, a whole sort of experience that again you can put together with multiple game builder tasks all together. So here you're on an adventure with your explorers, but your plane's damaged. You need to find the parts to come home. And you need to get them from a wizard who lives in the mountains. So you start off in the forest. You choose a cave to explore, and then the actual game mechanic themselves is a really, really simple inhibition task. So in this case, if you see the coins, you need to smash them with the pickaxe. If you see the gem, you need to inhibit your response, and then you'll collect it. If you manage to smash the gem with the pickaxe, you then lose out on it. This is the same mechanic again, but this time there's a pile of gold and there may or may not be a dragon behind it. So if you see the dragon, you have to inhibit pressing the space bar, and he'll go away and give you a gem. But if you get it wrong, he'll come and roar at you. So again, this is taking that one mechanic and imagining it in several different ways in several different games. This is the driving one, so the same thing. You've got to respond to the signs, but if it turns out that the sign is actually a trap, you need to avoid it. You need to avoid pressing the button like this one, or if you do act, you'll end up going through the oil. This is my favorite one because this is one of my favorite effects to make it look like you're driving along. Actually, the car isn't moving at all. We're simply moving the cactus down the screen, which is how you make it look like something's driving along. And then at the most advanced end, this is a project called Number Beads, which is a game to teach children basic elementary maths, and you're given these sort of sets of beads, and then you have a knife that you can sort of chop them up with. And what you're trying to do is make beads of the target above. So you can chop them up into any size you want, and you can join them back together again to make twos. And once you've got enough, you move on to the next level, and you start making threes. So again, this one does have some custom scripting because these interactions are quite complex. But again, this is all the kind of thing that is possible, and all of the background things like the particle effects and everything are built into the engine. Final one I'd love to show you is from the same project, but this is about teaching fractions. And in this case, you're given two whole pieces here, and you need to cut them up into the fractions that you see in the bottom right, and that will form a little picture. So you've got the same cutter, but this time when you drag them out, it's showing you what you're going to cut them into. So we need some quarters along the bottom, some eighths, a half on the top of that, and a little 12 at the top to make a little sort of stick figure. Again, these are all things that we've been developing in our game tech that you can that we're trying to now bring out to everyone. So that is my whirlwind tour through the game builder, and those are some of the things that we've created. Some of them in house, some of them with our users, and that is that.
That was absolutely brilliant, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing. I've got a question for everybody who is watching. Having watched that whirlwind of first how you storyboard out a game, and then some simple examples from some of our staff and some of the more complicated examples that you've just seen, what do you think is going to be the bit that you find hardest about research games? Is it going to be the design element, coming up with a storyboard and the theme? Is it going to be finding the artwork? Is it going to be implementing it within the game? Are there particular bits about the implementation that you're most worried about? We'd love to hear your answers. In the chat as to what it is that you would like to know about. Is that, and then while we're getting those answers, I don't think I have any other questions.
Well, I think there's some nice ones coming through. There's a lot of people saying the graphic and design part, like the finding the artwork and then working out how to integrate it in. So I think like I say, we found that finding those assets online has been fairly doable on sites like Pixabay, and then being able to just load them into the editor and move them around to composite a scene together. But certainly that's the feel we've had from a lot of people, that and something I think, Joe, we might end up doing like a sort of masterclass on, and lots more guys to kind of help you sort of through that, because I think it's one of those things that there are a lot of this kind of stuff, and this applies in whether you're doing like really simple games from ages ago or even the really modern stuff with excuse me, fundamentally there's an awful lot of smoke and mirrors that goes on. So I was talking to one researcher earlier today about how would you have a whole thing where you want someone to come on screen and speak, and this sounds really complicated. I was like, well, yeah, but you can, if you actually look deeper, even things like Peppa Pig. I don't know if anyone's got kids here. We've got Peppa Pig basically on 24/7. That actually, when you look at when they're talking, it's actually really simple how it's done. All that you do is you simply have two pieces of art where you have an open mouth and a closed mouth, and you just flick between them to make it look like they're talking. And it's perfectly convincing. It looks fine. We totally understand what's going on. Other things that we've found as well in terms of making it look like, I mean, we talked about the tree example about making a forest out of one thing, and making clouds go across the sky to give it some movement, just as a simple animation move, and then all you do is move it across the thing and then move it back to the beginning, just move it across again to give the semblance of a sky. If you want it to look like something's moving really fast, you just move them really quickly and it looks like something's moving along. But I think that would be something that we would look to do as lots of tutorials on how to achieve certain effects, because a lot of it is really, really simple tricks that I think once you know, I think it's a bit like being told how to do a magic trick. Once you've been shown how it works and how you do it, it's like, oh, okay, this is a lot simpler than I thought it was.
Yeah, I think we're often intimidated. We know that Disney obviously does absolute wizardry and complete groundbreaking stuff, but actually the simple versions that are utterly convincing are quite, in fact, simple. These tricks have been around for at least 70 years now. Disney started back in the 1950s, and the tips and techniques are just really simple. Let me just answer some of the questions that have been coming up. Will we be able to access the slides for this demo? Yes. I don't know about the slides, but we'll have a recording, and then you can scrub your way through the recording. I've answered a couple of other questions. There's one question about, has anybody looked at the psychometric properties of these tasks, or I guess any gamified task more generally? I mean, these are research tasks. I'm sure the researchers have been looking at the data they get through. That's the point. I have, Katya, linked you to a talk at the Be Online conference, which was from Nico, for whom we built those Go No Go tasks, and he was analysing the training impact of sort of like 7 to 10-year-old kids training on Go No Go tasks every day for about 8 weeks. So yes, he's deep into the psychometric properties of these games. One other question from Omar was about justifying the ecological validity of the results. So this is a really interesting one, and I've linked you to a paper I wrote for the BE Guide, the Behavioral Economics Guide 2021. We're really talking about the ground truth here. We know when we run our classic tasks, we're not measuring actually, we're measuring a proxy for what's going in the brain. We're taking away a lot of noise to try and get something close to the ground truth. What we're really interested in as psychologists is understanding how people think, feel, and behave on their own in group, how they think, feel, and behave on their own in groups in the real world. When you put somebody in a lab in front of a screen and do one of our tasks, we're not getting close to that ecological validity, but we're getting a proxy of that ecological validity, and we think it hopefully correlates with it. Otherwise, the task isn't very helpful. The question is when we come to games, is that closer to classic tasks? Is it closer to the ground truth? Is it distant? Is it as close to the ground truth, but completely different from classic tasks? And we won't know. So it's going to, until we have the games and can use them in research, we won't know whether they give us the same results. Certainly, many researchers who we've been working with for 10 years think that this is a really useful approach to collecting data, because there is data that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get without gamifying the task. Because you can imagine, you could not convince anyone, let alone 7 to 10-year-olds, to do a Go No Go task 10 minutes a day for 8 weeks. They would do three trials and go, no, thank you, I'm done. But by disguising it into a game, he got that data, and he got great data, and you can watch his talk and he'll convince you of the quality of the data that he's getting through. And this means he can answer questions that just weren't answerable before. So one of the things we're interested in doing as more and more people build games is to look at how the games compare to classic tasks. And I think that's probably always going to be a first step. Is I'm going to do my classic task that I would typically do in the lab. I'm going to make a gamified version of that classic task. I will run both of them on a similar group of adults, and I'll see how the data compares, because you're going to have to convince yourself first that you're measuring the same thing before you can have any chance of convincing reviewer two. Great. Nick, I think we're ready to move on to
Yes, absolutely. So
unless there are any other questions, if you do have any other questions, dump them into the chat and I'll try and make sure we get to them by the end. And if not, and when we send around the recording, we'll try and make sure we've got some of the answers from the Q&A there as well. Oh, there are 3 more open ones, sorry. Yeah, the slides ones, yes, I've answered that one. My experiment is a language-based one. I'm unsure I can use any of the examples provided. Are there other games that are more relevant to language? The one with the grid was a language game. That was a Dorothy Bishop's game. She studies developmental language disorder. It was playing an auditory point, which was a sentence like put the bike above the bell or put the bike next to the bell. Kids with developmental language disorder find it hard to process that type of grammar, and so she was making it sequentially harder and harder, both as an assessment task, but then also as a training task. So that's one example. Another example of a language game we've done, it was for teaching deaf children how to speech read. Phonemes are the individual units of spoken language, and visemes, the shape your mouth makes, are the individual units of visual speech. And the games we were creating were helping train deaf children's sensitivity to the visemes by giving them increasingly closer words to discriminate. So you'd start off with something like Apple versus helicopter. And then in the middle, you'd have something like Apple versus hammer, which is surprisingly similar, although written completely differently. And by the end, the kids were discriminating things like ship versus chip, which are extraordinarily similar visually, but the slight difference of tension in these bits of the cheek muscles here, and really great speech readers can tell the difference. So yes, there are language-based games, but you might need to be creative and very happy to like, if we do one of these design workshops, that could be something that we look into in more detail. Any more questions, do please put them in the Q&A, but I think now we need to move on to multiplayer, otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Yeah. So just before I do that, because I think this also came up in an earlier question. Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, we're running early access. So if you're interested in having a go with the game builder and taking it for a spin, go to gorilla.sc/join Gorilla Early Access, and you can apply to join the early access scheme and get access to the tools early. And there's more details on the page there, but in a nutshell, you can try them out now. If you like them and want to use them, then you can get 50% off the license price before the end of early access, which is going to run until the end of January. All right, so on to multiplayer. So we've wanted to do multiplayer for a while, and obviously we're super excited to finally have it in place in Gorilla. One of the things that really kind of struck us when we were working out how to do it was that multiplayer is one of the things that on the surface sounds very simple. If you take some of the classic multiplayer tasks like the Ultimatum game or the Prisoner's Dilemma, they're really easy to describe. So you show an amount of money, player A offers player B a proportion of it, and player B can accept or refuse. If they accept, they both get their share, and if they refuse, they both get nothing. You can describe the whole protocol in 3 sentences. Now, of course, in reality, it's not that simple. It's incredibly complicated. You've got connection, handshaking, and networking, and matchmaking, and synchronization, and handling disconnections, and all the rest of it. But as a researcher, you don't care about that. You want to focus on the science, not the kind of programming of all of this. This isn't your problem. It's my problem. So it was really important for us that none of that complexity kind of leaks through into the tools that you're trying to use. And so we've tried to capture and keep the clarity and simplicity that you expect from Gorilla. So yeah, so it's simple to describe, but the internals are just really, really fiddly. So the key insight for us, and I appreciate that this sounds really kind of obvious, is that a multiplayer task is just a regular task with more than one person. Everything else is still the same. We still have trials and screens where we present things and capture responses, but sometimes only one of the players is allowed to do something and the other player has to wait. And sometimes we want to record player A's response and show it to player B. So to set the scene, so unlike Game Builder, multiplayer is not a new tool. It's built into the new version of the Task Builder 2, as we're now calling it. So if you can build a normal task in Gorilla, you can build a multiplayer task. The only thing you do differently is you specify which elements on the screen should be visible to each player. So so you lay them all out, you specify which ones are for both. So in this case, here's my Ultimatum game example again. So in the sort of brownie orange you've got on the table is $100. You want them both to see that. And you want the green stuff to be seen by player A and the blue stuff to be player B. So you just put it all on the screen and then tag which ones are seen by who. So let's go ahead and see this in action. I've got 2 browsers running here. I've got Edge on the left and Chrome on the right. And if I go and start a preview, I can then join these 2 previews together. So I'm running this all on one local machine, but on 2 separate browsers, so we can simulate having 2 separate people. This is how you join them in preview on the live, in your actual experiment. This will be done in the experiment tree, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. So the first thing we show them is their instructions. So if your player's game with someone else, here are the instructions, obviously you know what they are. Now, in this case, by default, we want both players to read the instructions before we move on. So the first player clicks next, the second player is still reading. It's only when the second player clicks next that we're ready to move on. There is a chat box in there. So I put in a cheesy thing where they can talk to each other first. So you can either have this as before or after, you can have it open while they're responding to each other. This is an example of how you can actually allow them to directly communicate. So let's see what happens. They're offered $100. How much are we going to offer? So they say $50, seems fair. You can see it's appeared on the other person's screen, and now the second player gets to accept or refuse that offer. They accepted it, so that's great. And then in my one, I've given them another opportunity to chat to one another. And let's see what happens next. The main thing that we're doing here is allowing them to directly communicate between trials. So I know there's something that other people might want to do. So now it's the other way around. Now it's the second player gets used, but now there's a lot more money on the table. Let's see what happens. Oh dear, they haven't kept to their end of the bargain. So what's the first player going to do? Well, they've kind of broken their word here. And now you can get the denouement of what's happened. And all of this chat stream is going to come through into your data. So if you did actually want to analyze what they said and incorporate that into what you're doing, you certainly can do. So that's what the actual task looks like from a participant's point of view. Let's look at how that's actually built on the back end. So here it is. So this is the new version of the task builder. For those familiar with the Grilla, you'll see that there's a lot of similarities and some new things that are enhanced and easier to use. So here's the instruction screen. The instruction screen is just like it would be in a regular Grilla task. There's nothing multiplayer specific in here at all. There's some instructions and a continue button. And the default behavior we have is that both players need to click next to continue. If I go to the second screen where I put that chat window, so there's the big chat box in the middle, and you can see I've bound it to a network field, which I just call chat. So what this lets you do is save the chat to a particular variable. So if you want them to cut the chat room to come back again, you can do. So here's the actual main trial. Now you'll see that the amount comes from the spreadsheet and the way we normally do that kind of thing. And then you'll see that how much would you offer the other player text is only shown to player A, along with the input and the next button. And we use a simple multiplayer component to say this should only be seen by player A. We then have another piece of text in the same place as the first one saying the other player is making an offer and that's only for player B. When we go onto the second screen, we then do the same thing but the other way around. The accept and refuse buttons are there for player B. And the other prompts are saying what you've offered is there for player A. Now, the other main elements here on the table is and the amount, like those are common to both of them, so we don't need to do anything there. And then the offer that was done in the first screen is then drawn on that second screen. Then I put the chat room back in again, and I've put into the same field so we get the same chat stream and the same chat history. But by simply binding it to a different variable, you could have different chat windows between different sets of players. You could have two separate conversations happening simultaneously just by deciding which field you attach them to. Finally, the way how you do things like turn taking is that when you configure when you enable multiplayer and say I want this to be for 2 players, you get these 2 special columns in your spreadsheet, player A and player B. Whenever your players get matched together, they come through in a determined order. So there's a sort of player 1 and player 2, if you like. And this lets you control of those players, which one gets to be player A and which one gets to be player B for any particular trial. So you can see in my case, in the first trial, the first player gets to be player A and the second player gets to be player B. And then I switch those 2 around so that the other person gets to have a turn. So that's how, so as you see, it's a very, very small layer on top of the standard task builder thing. The vast majority of the time, all you're doing is putting that little multiplayer component on things saying, only let player A do this, only let player B do this. So now, in the course of developing these tools, we've also been having lots of conversations with researchers about recruiting for multiplayer studies. And so I'd like to share some of their insights as to what they've been telling us. So one key aspect of running a multiplayer task is that inevitably attrition results in a higher amount of data that you have to exclude. If 2 participants are playing together and one drops out, then the other one's left high and dry. And we've spoken to several researchers who do online multiplayer research, and they all say that it's fundamentally, it's just a fact of life and you just have to deal with it. So I can summarize their advice as expect it, don't allow yourself to be blindsided. The actual attrition rate is likely to be similar for individual research, but it's the fact that you can't use data from the remaining players that results in higher data exclusion. Secondly, be clear and fair in your experiment listing. If someone drops out, there's not much we can do if they decide to close the browser and walk off. Just pay everyone for their time and move on. Prolific, I think, can advise you here too if you're recruiting via Prolific. I think just understand this is not a new problem, and there are guidelines and best practices emerging of how to handle it. And the final piece of advice they seem to give is to do what you can to encourage people to take part at similar times. And you can think outside the box a bit here. So you might to do small bursts of recruitment at certain times of the day. When they sign up to take part, you might want to give them some kind of calendar invite to kind of nudge them to all kind of go for it at the same time. There's some quite clever things you can do here just to maximize the chance that there'll be lots of players at the same time, which is kind of what you want. And finally, they said, look, just have good boundaries. You know, if some people are might well get frustrated or disappointed if they're not able to be match made. If you've got a 4-player game and there's only 3 in the lobby and they have to wait for a bit and then they can't take part. Obviously, that's frustrating, but there's really nothing that anyone can do about that. Okay. Secondly, an idea that also comes up a bit is this idea of having an AI. If a participant drops out, could we use some kind of AI to sort of play in their place? Again, we've gone through this with a number of researchers, and the conclusion so far has always been that ultimately it's just not worth it. Fundamentally, it's very complicated. What kind of responses should this AI give? How would you determine them? I mean, feasibly, you could specify a backup response for every screen and on every trial of your task. If the real person isn't there to give it, but that's an awful lot of extra work. If you're using things like the chat room that I showed, how do you populate that sensibly? But secondly, and I think more importantly, it's unlikely that the data will be usable anyway. As the first thing any reviewer is going to say is, well, these aren't real responses. You just made half of them up, and so of course they're going to be like that. So I think at the moment, while it feels like it's a tempting idea and it keeps coming up, and I know it's trying to mitigate attrition, which is always painful. Ultimately, the advice we're getting people is it doesn't really solve anything. You'll just end up with more data that you can't use. And if anything, you're likely to expose yourself to more expense because you end up having to pay the remaining parties in full, even though you don't end up using their data. Players per game. So when you design a multiplayer task, one of the key decisions you have to make is how many players per game. So the ultimatum game that we did earlier, that's obviously for 2 players, but you might want to design tasks for larger groups. Now, in Guerrilla, while there's no hard limit, we're aiming for a sort of soft cap of around 8 players. We think it's unlikely many people want to go higher than that. And the vast majority are going to be 2, 3, or 4. Again, the main reasons for this are twofold. With larger games, attrition is more harmful. As we said before, if you have a 4-player game and one drops out, you lose the other 3. But actually, more importantly, larger games can potentially end up reducing your experimental power because your power calculations may rest more on the number of instances of your game rather than just the sheer number of players. If you ran 100 participants in 10-player games, you only really have 10 games in your sample. If you run them in 2-player games, you have 50 games in your sample. So that's a trade-off you're going to have to consider. So to summarize all of that, it's really just keep it simple. Like, we've done what we can to keep the tech side of it simple. And the advice that we're getting from everyone is to keep the online running of it simple. Keep player count small, be prepared for attrition, and think creatively about how you can minimize it. And don't get distracted by the idea of dropouts and AI and everything. It is going to be more expensive than doing research on individuals, but if you want to research social behavior, then sooner or later, you're going to need to get people to behave socially and measure it. And this is one of the main ways you can do that. The data you get is going to be rarer and consequently more valuable. And as we all know, groundbreaking research is priceless.
Nick, I actually just want to jump in with a question here for our audience. So pull up your chat. You've been doing this for the 3rd time now, so you know what you're doing. I'd like to know if you've got big concerns about multiplayer recruitment, or if you've got advice about multiplayer recruitment that you'd like to share with everybody else here. We've got lots of researchers here, and between you have founts of wisdom. So either in the chat, your big worry about multiplayer recruitment, or your advice about multiplayer recruitment from your experiences.
So we'll give people a couple of minutes to fill those in. But to finish off this part, I think the last bit is just to kind of reiterate. So who is this for? So well, in the first instance, if your research feels like behavioral economics, like social psychology and group decision making, then you match a lot of our current users for these tools, and I'm sure you'd find these a great addition to your tool belt. If you've used tools like Otree or Ztree and found them hard going, then do consider having a go with this. If you've been running group studies in the lab and you've had to switch and doing them via Zoom, there's now a way you can build and deploy these studies online and then just point Prolific at them. So if you recognize yourself in there somewhere, great, you're exactly who we have in mind for these tools. For everyone else, I have a different proposal. So we think that this opens up loads of research space in other domains, in cognition, in memory, in language, attention, and so on. And these are domains where we traditionally test people individually. But humans are social creatures, and we don't often approach research from this perspective, and we only just test them in isolation. So I'd like to invite you all now to have a think to yourself, what would a social version of my research look like? How might people affect and influence each other? And how would that help me better understand their behavior? Now, of course, some effects are too small to incorporate all these additional factors. And of course, there are some areas where this wouldn't be appropriate, but I think it's worth thinking about. And there may well be some really exciting new areas to explore. And I just want to finish by saying, like, there's a reason we've built multiplayer into our core tools, rather than it being a special case niche tool for a special case niche research. Now, I might be wrong, but I think it'd be a travesty if these research areas are left unexplored just because we lack the tools to do so. And by building multiplayer into our core tooling, we'll bring them into an ecosystem that everyone can use. All right. That's the end of that section. I think there's been a couple of bits in the chat, Joe.
Yes, I've answered some questions that have come through in the question and answer area as they go. There's just been a question come through from Frank in the chat, which is, what's the recommendation to get enough people online at the same time? And Frank, in fact, managed to answer his own question, but I'll read it out so that everybody benefits from his wisdom. That's exactly the advice that Prolific has said. They say they're quite busy at certain times of day, which unsurprisingly, I think is sort of like early evening in each of their markets, which is typically the UK and the US. So if you put out on your advert that the study is going to be open at that time and then it will close at this time, you're more likely to get groups of people. You thought, yeah. And I think groups of 2, you'll probably have absolutely no problems. If you needed groups of 20, then you're probably completely mad. But yeah, that's how you do it. We do have another researcher who we've worked with who does do experiments of groups on hundreds of people at the same time, but he organizes those as live events. So he creates entertainment opportunities in museums and does them as shy courses and then has people take part in that setting. So you have to be a little bit creative. You could probably do something interesting with science broadcasters, so Life Scientific, Rutherford and Fry, so people who are broadcasting over radio, and then lots of people listening at the same time could go onto their device and take part all at the same time. A question from Olga: is video recording eye tracking going to be integrated to multiplayer scenarios? Yeah, so yes, in a sense. So there's nothing. Those two things are essentially pretty orthogonal. If you happen to want to record a video of your participants or do eye tracking with your participants, and they happen to also be playing a multiplayer game, there's no reason why that shouldn't work. I guess I'm not sure if you're imagining incorporating the video recordingness into the multiplayer, into the logic of the multiplayer in some way, but yeah, if you're simply trying to collect eye tracking data while they play a multiplayer game, yes, absolutely, there's no reason that would be a problem. Cool. So any other questions from anyone about multiplayer? No. So I'm just putting that link back up again if you're interested, if you want to, again, so same thing we're doing with Game Builder. If you'd like to have a go with the multiplayer tools and evaluate them for your research, sign up at gorilla.se/join Gorilla Early Access. We'll give you access to Task Builder 2 and the multiplayer functionality within that, so that you can start having a go with it. And there are plenty of step-by-step guides and documentation, which is obviously still in progress, but there's plenty of material there to get you off the ground and get going. Sorry, there were 2 other questions. Sorry, Mohammed, that I didn't get to you. So one question was about creating a cumulative task between 2 participants centered around describing tangrams and other pre-selected images. So yes, I think this would be straightforward. You'd have lots of drag and drop zones with the images on them. You'd have the chat room open. Both participants would be able to see all the objects. Participant A wouldn't be able to move the objects, but can type into the chat room. Participant B can move the objects, but can't type into the chat room. So participant A is describing to participant B what to do, and participant B has to do it. It's like, no, not the one with the and then go, okay, yeah, I've done it. And you could see how they end up communicating with each other. And then Frank has got a question about pricing. So both Game Builder and Multiplayer are add-ons to our core tools. We might not be, I don't know if we've decided to only allow the add-ons on subscriptions. So we might make it so it's for researcher subscription, lab subscription, and department subscription upwards, but we haven't decided yet. Certainly, while it's in early access, you get to play with them for free, although we're not guaranteeing them for data collection at this stage because they're in early access, but you get to try them and give feedback and see what would work so that you can be ahead of the curve. Anybody who signs up to early access and gives us feedback is entitled to a 50% discount if they buy within the early access period. That's fine, Frank. And of course, as always, our pricing is flexible and scalable. So depending on how many people you have using the tool, there are different prices. So it costs different for an individual researcher from a department, as would be appropriate. And then you pay for your tokens as you normally would. You're very welcome, Frank.
Fantastic. So I think that's most of the content we have today. As we alluded to at the beginning, I think some people have asked in the chat, I do have one last thing. As I said at the start, Multiplayer is implemented into the core tech that we're using for our new suite of tools. Right now, we've only exposed it in Task Builder, but Game Builder is built on that same technology stack. So that means that in due course, we will be bringing Multiplayer to the Game Builder too. Everything we talked about still applies. If you can build a single player game, you can build a multiplayer game. Just like before, you would build a game as normal and assign certain elements of particular players. And I think the key thing here is this is really coming from one of our design principles here, which is to make research possible. It's up to you, the scientist, to decide what research is important, what research is relevant, what research is necessary, what research is valuable. But it's our job to make it possible. And so that's what we've been doing. All right, that's everything that I have here. And as I say, when the multiplayer tools go into Game Builder, we may well do another early access period for that specific combination. But otherwise, if are there any other questions, do let us know now, and we'd love to answer them.
And for those of you that don't have any other questions, just thank you so much for joining us for our Gorilla Presents New Tools webinar this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you've come from. I hope we left you feeling excited about where you can take your research in 2022. Do sign up for the early access so that you can get a head start in next year's research. I know for me, this is reaching the end of the year, I start thinking about the year ahead, and most of what I'm doing for the next month is just setting myself up for success in 2022 rather than trying to close things out for 2021. As always, the team here at Gorilla are going to be making you tools that make your research lives easier and more productive. If you've got any suggestions for us, do use the Gorilla Roadmap, get in touch with the team and say, look, the one thing I really struggle with and the one thing that's really painful is this. And I reckon you guys could fix it because it's so close to what you're doing already. We always love to hear your suggestions, and where we can, we like to jump on them. Thank you so much for the feedback in the chat and for joining in and sharing your thoughts. Yes, we really appreciate it. It's really useful to have such a great community who are generous and kind with their time and their feedback. It helps us be the best technical providers that we can be. So with that, there's going to be a survey when you leave. Please answer the questions. They help us be more useful. Yeah, the answers are tremendously helpful for us. As I said, do sign up for early access to get on a head start next year. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight. Many thanks. Take care. Have a lovely day.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah.